I got his phone number and I called, and his wife answered. And she says, "Who is this?" I told her. She started crying. She says, "The last thing that Rudy spoke to me, said before he died, the very last thing he said, be sure and let Hays know." She said, "I didn't have the heart to call and tell you." We was like brothers. I mean, or even more so. I was closer to him than I was my brother. So all the boys had been in the service, whether it's Army or Navy or whatever it was, stood up and said where they'd been and what they did and so on and so forth. See, I was sworn to secrecy. I had to sign that I'd never say a word to anybody for 70 years. No pictures were taken, nobody had a camera. You learned to keep your mouth shut or let them do the talking and you did the listening. And boy, here I am between a rock and a hard place. What am I going to do? So when they come my turn, I told them I'd served in the South Pacific, and I said I was aboard a ship, and I did just exactly, my job was to do just exactly what they told me, and I said that was what I did. I was a senior, and in the meantime, the war started in Europe, and they were having the draft at that time. All the boys that was 18 in high school got drafted, and I kept wanting my dad to sign for me to enlist. I was 17 when I finally enlisted, and he told me between Christmas and New Year's that he would, if I could get my mother to sign the papers, that he would. In the meantime, I had a school teacher that had 2 nephews in the Navy. And they were home. They were on the USS Oklahoma at Pearl Harbor when it got hit and rolled over. So they jumped the ship into the oil on the water, and that water was afire, and they was pretty well blistered. But this was a year later in Thanksgiving. So the teacher asked me, she says, "Would you like to go with me to see my nephews? They're home on leave." And I said, "Would I?" And so I asked my dad, I said, "Can I get out of the milking this weekend?" And he grumbled about it, you know. It seems like you always hear what the parents grumble. They don't say yes or no, they grumble. And so I did. Went with them, and it was amazing. After I was introduced to them, they told me what a wonderful thing the U.S. Navy was. Everything was nice and clean. You always had a bed to sleep in, and the food was pretty good, and you got to see the world. And they were dressed in white. My goodness, good looking young men, or at least I thought so. And so when I got back that evening, I asked my dad, I said, "Would it be possible that you would sign, let me go with the Navy?" I was still 17. I didn't think he'd ever sign it. But finally he told me between Christmas and New Year's that he would sign it. So then I started on my mother. I think she had already decided that I was going to be gone one way or the other. If they didn't sign, I'd probably be drafted when I become 18, see. They took me to Council Bluffs at the federal building, and I enlisted there at the federal building. To me, it was a piece of cake because I was used to working on the farm. I could lift more than most of them, kids that age. I could also run. Well, when you have livestock on the farm and you grew up on the farm, you see birth and death and all of those things. Yeah. Why, you get a considerable education over people that have no idea what it is. In boot camp, the first thing is they learn you to make your own bed. Second thing is they make you understand what they tell you. Boy, they mean business now. They don't say, I'll do that when I get around to it. That just don't go. And consequently, the boot camp for me was very easily, because I was used to working some hard on the farm, you know. I met a young fellow by the name of Rudy Hardner from Gulfport, Mississippi. And him and I competed with one another. When we would run 2 miles, we'd see who could be back quickest. Little did we know that they were watching every minute of it. And so when they would say, give me 10 push-ups, we would see who could do the quickest. And we were both the same age, the same height, and weighed the same. 130 pounds and 5'8". Little did we know that that was going on our record. So after boot camp, we got in camp. We registered, and so this Rudy and I had gotten back together, and so believe it or not, they ordered 24 of us out of 240 in boot camp to go to Virginia. We had no idea what school we were going to. Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Higgins boat. That's the one with lets the ramp down. All plywood boat with a small engine and big engines in them, and that's exactly what we got into this school. Rudy was still with me, or I was with him, whichever way you want to put it. And so we trained together for, and there I knew how to put cables on the batteries and motors on the boats and do things that needed to be done, and most of them didn't know how. So I was designed as an engineer, and so we trained there for about 6 weeks in Virginia. This Higgins boat, we took them out into the Atlantic there, Chesapeake Bay, and we made many landings, and showed us how to take on, move from one landing to another, and how to get up on the beach and let the ramp down, and then crank the ramp back up by hand. There wasn't anything easy about it. As later on, I did not know that we were training for combat duty. And as the days went on, we just kept learning more, probably what the Marines did a lot of. And but in the meantime, I was in charge of the Higgins boat that was aboard the ship. We had 32 of those Higgins boats on board the ship. And when they got them all unloaded, see, we could carry 35 full dressed Marines in a Higgins boat to the shore. And if it was real high seas, why, chances are you could only carry 27 to 25 to keep the boat from getting a lot of water in the boat, see, lashing over. And we knew that we were going to end up in combat someplace. We were trained to the point of a spear, the best trained the military had in the USA. The reason they take you when you're 17, you can learn. They took only ones that was handpicked, that could learn, could remember, could see. Everybody had good eyesight, good hearing. The one thing that really cut everybody down to size is they would have see, we each weighed 130 pounds. You had to be able to lift and to carry a 130-pound man on your back for a mile and a half. Well, that cut off some more of them. And I could do that because I used to doing heavy lifting on the farm. And the 10-mile run, why, I thought some of those guys was going to die on the way. Their lungs just couldn't take it. Well, I'm one of these here guys that chafed pretty bad in the groin. And on that 10-mile run, well, my shoes were full of blood. The water running down my legs, see, our blood it was. And the old chief says, I asked him, I said, what am I going to do about that? Hit the water over there. He said, there's plenty of water in there. Go hit the beach and that salt water will take care of it. There was absolutely no picture taken. And you learn to keep your mouth shut or let them do the talking and you did the listening. And of course, that sounds pretty good till you're putting in 20 hours. You ain't gonna fuss with nobody. That's exactly what we were trained to do. And let me tell you, the training was tough. It is awfully hard, you know, almost 80 years ago that I was in this training to remember word for word. But at the same time, it was so different than anything that I'd grown up with. And at one time, there at Navy SEALs training, I almost told them I was almost had enough. They had a In the Navy SEALs training, they had a post with a bell on it. And if you decided to quit, you went up and rang that bell, and nobody would know you quit, only the ones that was teaching us. And my instructor was a little red-headed Irishman. He was about 5'6" or 7", so we all towered over him. And he was red-headed. His face was red. You've probably seen somebody that has a red face and red-headed. Mm-hmm. And I'm a-telling you, he had a voice you could hear for miles. Such a voice as he had, it was impossible to believe. And he knew each one of us like we were brothers to him. And he made it pretty plain that what he said, that you heard it. Mm-hmm. He actually lived with us. If you ate, he ate. If we didn't get to eat, he didn't either. And very good instructor, very good. And everything that he did tell us previously was exactly what we needed to know. We finally, when we pulled into the harbor there at Pearl Harbor, there was 9 or 10 battleships still upside down in the at their moorings. The Japanese had hit so many of them. The Arizona's still there. So when we left, we didn't realize until we got out to sea, then they come over our loudspeaker that we were headed for Hollandia, New Guinea. That's across the equator, across the international date line. We crossed the international date line and the equator at the same day. And so, in the meantime, we had some duty in the Carolinas Islands, the Marshalls, and when we got into Hollandia, New Guinea, we had to anchor at sea. You could still hear the gunfire in New Guinea. The Japanese still owned the high ground, but it was so-called secure. American were landing a lot of ships and distributed food and stuff like that, you know. Supply ships.
So it was deemed secure, but the Japanese were still there?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
About the second or third night, why the SEALs were called up. And we had a mission. I never forgot, and never will forget, I suppose, that this was the first time that we had been on a mission where gunfire was shooting over your head. Mm-hmm. You didn't know whether it was big stuff or what, but you could hear the whistling going over your head, you know. Yeah. And got us scared to death, absolutely scared to death. And so was the whole crew. Well, we got our work done and went back to the main ship the next morning. And so then our instructors, they debriefed us, you know, after we come back in every morning. Sometimes it would be 7:30, 8 o'clock. And before you could say anything to anybody or do anything, they took you in an individual room the size of our restrooms here and debriefed everybody for 1 hour.
Wow.
Everything you've seen, everything you, encountered on that night, and you told them what it was. And they always come up with you had to try to figure out on these islands, how many Japanese do you think are there? Are they heavy equipment? Are they just foot soldiers? Do they have heavy armament? That was our job to find out, as well as how deep the water was, because otherwise the big landing craft couldn't get in, but we could. And so the second night, we hit the same island on a different side. And yeah, it was a little better, but my God, you're scared to death. And so when we got back aboard the next morning, they called us together after everybody been debriefed and told us, you guys are fighting it. You think you're trying to protect yourself. Remember what you learned, what you were taught in Florida? Everything you were taught in Florida has to do with what you're doing now. And there was a settlement there in the area of a little place called Batangas. I remember it very plain, and I kept telling my kids, well, where did you go? And I said, well, we were in Batangas. And my kids would say, you can't find that on the map anywhere. Said, you're just kidding me. You made that up. So I was to a garage sale once and I seen a globe. And the first thing I looked on that globe is Batangas there. I bought that daggone globe just to show kids that Batangas does exist. And so anyway, we scouted those islands from 8 to 10 nights. And each one of us would be separate. The minute we hit the island, we would scatter, use hand signals, tell each one of us where they were going to go, and we never argued. We never, you take this and I'll take that. No. We made sure we didn't go the same place every night. Each one of us seen something different. You got to remember that that's all heavy jungle. And sometimes we'd get stranded and we'd be on this island for like 3 or 4 days maybe without food or water. And you learn to find where the monkeys are and what the monkeys could eat, you could eat without it being poisoned. As we'd climb the palm trees and cut down a coconut or two and split them open, drink the water, and eat the coconut. And if the monkeys could eat the leaves on the trees, we would go up high enough that cut a limb down and eat the leaves off the trees. You don't know how. You can go several days without eating, but you can't go very long without water. We learned that the hard way. Our boats had kegs of water on them, but we wasn't with the boat all the time. There were certain crews took us in. I'll go back to that a little bit, that if the wind was in your face, they could take you within 2 to 3 miles of the island. If the wind was to your back, you had to stay out at least 5 miles, otherwise they could hear the boat. Over the side, we had no watches. We didn't know what time it was, and didn't make any difference. When the sun started to break on the horizon, why, regardless of where we were at on that island, we would come back to where we made the landing. Then we would all hit the water and head out. You were hoping if it was normal sea, they could find you pretty easily. If it was high seas, 30-foot waves and bigger, you were down here and they were looking for you up here, and it was the same way up and down. And if they could, the boats that was to pick us up would look for us. Sometimes they'd look for us several hours before they could find us. And a real good friend of mine was on an aircraft carrier. He fighter pilot on a carrier. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me, well, him and I had some stories to tell. And he was telling me, he said, you know, you have no idea you're up 10,000 feet. And the gas gauge is going like this, no carrier in sight. He said, you just can't imagine what that feels like. I said, I happen to know how that feels like. I said, you was in the air and I'm in the water, it don't make any difference. Somebody's got to find you. And can you imagine that there's many trips we made. One thing that they told us every day, time we went out, whatever you do, don't get caught. Yeah. We need the information. We have to have the information. What you do tonight will make a difference what happens tomorrow. And so we were trained just for this type of work. And that's all we did. Well, first thing is, they want to know how deep the water was. Whether there was hedgehogs out in it, whether there was coral. They really wanted to know the condition of the island, so that bigger transports like the LSTs and LCMs and all of those could bring troops in without hauling them in Higgins boats, and also armament and different things. Now here's a little something that as we kept moving north through the Philippines from Luzon, that's the south end of the Philippines, up through Subic Bay. Subic Bay is pretty much in the middle. This is one of the things that people didn't understand, and we've seen many I don't know exactly how to put it. It would be like a small town, only it isn't a town there. They would be probably 300 to 500, maybe even 1,000 Filipinos, and they've got a settlement. We would meet with them once in a while, and I remember that by the way, I got caught once. And if I hadn't been soaking wet, I would have been. Just felt something on my shoulder after we got ashore. Somebody, a Filipino tapped me on the shoulder. I didn't know it was a Filipino. And so we wouldn't talk to him. And he said, Mexicano, Mexicano. And no ID on the shoulder seat. We left our dog tags and everything aboard ship. We didn't exist as far as the world knew. When we left that ship, we did not exist. We were taken off the rolls. So as time went on, why, by the way, this Filipino was a talker. By that I mean he contacted the Army or MacArthur certain times of the night on certain days, and a short wave, and he spoke to them back and forth. So this Filipino, he was short like they mostly are. We've seen many Filipino tribes, and very gracious people really, but what the Japanese did to them, I won't even come close to trying to tell you. It might make you sick. And what they have done is just unbelievable. And so that made us guys really pay attention to when we went on an island. Okinawa was the hardest battle we was in. It was monsoon season, and it is an island that's not covered with, it's covered with dirt, not rock or jungle. There's jungle there now. There's a big Navy base there now. Yeah. Communication center. And I've had people that served there and come and see me. Says, how was it like? I said, can you imagine what hell's like? I said, that was even worse than anything you can even think of. Yeah. Besides that, I got ripped open in the abdomen.
What caused that to happen?
I won't tell you.
Okay.
Well, let's put it this way, I come out on top.
Fair enough, fair enough.
The Japanese fought to their die. Nobody ever surrendered. Yeah. Nobody. And it was a tough island. Half of it was on the west side was Hacksaw Ridge. You know where you've heard of that movie? Mm-hmm. Well, and the Marines couldn't get up Hacksaw Ridge. So a couple of nights, our administrator told us, he says, got something new for you. I said, what could be new in this place? And he said, you've heard of that place where the Marines can't get up to get the high ground? Yeah, I know where it is. And he said, want you guys go up that tonight. Drop ropes down so they can climb back up Hacksaw Ridge the next wave. So, like I told people that, and the Marines admit it. I've talked to several Marines, and said they couldn't get up there because they picked them off singly in the daytime. See, we went up at night, in the dark. We dropped cables over the side so they could climb back up. How'd you do it? I said, main strength and awkwardness. we learned this in SEALs training, that every night that we come aboard, back aboard the old Dolphin, always the clergy would come up and say a prayer over us. And the ship was big enough that we had a priest, we had a rabbi, and we had a regular military chaplain. And sometimes it would be all three of them, sometimes it'd be two, sometimes it would be, wouldn't have a regular military chaplain, but they would always come up and say, and I remember this so plain, I still remember it like it was yesterday, that they always finished the prayer with, and I don't know if you're familiar with the 23rd Psalm or not, though I walk through the valley of death, I fear no evil. And it seems like we had the feeling, I did, and I think my other three friends did too, that the minute that we crawled down over the side and got into the powerboat, because the ship was, sometimes 10, 15 miles out, and that we had that feeling that we were covered, we were protected. Until you've had this feeling yourself, it's hard to explain it to somebody else. And people tell me, oh, how lucky you were. It wasn't luck. That our Heavenly Father was watching over us. I fully believe it, and I believe it today as much as I did when I was there. And there's one thing that settles my mind probably as much as anything that I can do to my own body is if I can't sleep and I walk and I come back and I still can't sleep, the Bible's right there by my chair, and I pick it up and I read some passages, and I still flip over to the 23rd Psalm. And so I know God has watched over me. I haven't been lucky. Heavenly Father, I think we would have lost the war if it hadn't been for God's on our side. I really do. Regardless of where we were at on that island, we would come back to where we made the landing. Then we would all hit the water and head out. There's many trips we made. They sooner or later always found us. And then you think that's luck? No, that ain't luck. The Heavenly Father, let me tell you. See, I couldn't tell anybody anything. For 70 years I wasn't supposed to. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Well, as we worked our way up the peninsula in the Philippines, why, the farther we went north, the tougher it got. The Japanese knew they were going to lose. The big island is Leyte. Far north is Leyte, Leyte. and it was the biggest island of all, and it was pretty heavily covered with brush, and I would judge that there was probably 80,000 Japanese on that island. And what they did to the Filipino people, I don't have the words to tell you. And then the next little island, which everybody knows, that was at Iwo Jima. It had been scouted by the air many times. And they thought it was nice white sandy beaches, and they thought that that was, oh boy, you guys are gonna have a good time there. It wasn't white sand, broken coral about this deep. And when they would step off of the landing craft into they would go in up over their boot tops of broken coral, sharp like a razor. And so I estimated it was sort of heavy armament. That I don't recall any tanks or mounted guns, big guns there, only the ones that were in the caves. And they told us, whatever we do, it's forbidden for you guys to go up on Suribachi, the mountain. The rest of it is fairly flat and rocky, and there wasn't much vegetation on it. Big boulders and rocks, and so, and they thought that that might last 2 weeks to take that island back. It lasted 27 days. I remember this very distinctly, that we had 5,000 Marines and Army on the island, on the beaches, and they pulled the heavy armament out of the caves and the tunnels, and they killed 5,000 soldiers and Marines right there, never left the beach. And some of the bad things that I hadn't expected was we learned on that beach there that they lost so many so quick that brought in a load of soldiers, a load of Marines, and the beach master says, we was ready to back off and go back to the mother ship and pick up some more. And the beach master says, you can't go yet. Got a job for you. Well, here they come. 5 or 6 dead ones, 6 or 7 or 8 wounded ones in baskets, and put them on the floor and then across the boat, and says, take them to the hospital ship. It was 15 miles out. And we take them in, pick them up, take them out to the hospital ship, go back to the mother ship, get another load of soldiers. Same thing happened again, time after time after time. And by the way, the closer to Japan we got, the more resistance there was, and it was just night and day. That then after Okinawa, why they sent us back to Manila, and from Manila they told us that the next trip out, you know, it's gonna be Japan. On September the 5th, you guys are gonna go into Japan underwater. You've got to sign a paper that you've volunteered. You fully volunteered. All of you that volunteer, we want you to sign the papers. You do it. And if you don't want to do it, it won't be held against you, because chances are you coming back is about none. And so Rudy and I were still together. He says, "Hey, what do you think?" I said, "Are you gonna go?" "Yeah." I said, "You're not gonna go alone." So we, all of us signed up. So it took us a couple of days to put on more ammunition and different things. And then we sailed from Manila. We rendezvoused up into the Tokyo area. And we got the word come over the PA system that the Japanese just surrendered. So the ship just made a big circle and went back to Manila as the leader. We were the fourth ship behind the Missouri. We were that important. And so when the armistice was signed on September the 5th, all of the ship's sailors were dressed in white so that the Japanese could see. You've always seen it in the movies, how they're all lined up. That's the way they were. Every guy that wanted to get a look at what Tokyo was like was dressed in white along it. And they were all on the side on the ship. When MacArthur said, "And these proceedings are finished," boy, a whistle blew on our ship, and it says, "Scouts and Raiders, full combat gear. You got a job." And so they lowered our boats, and our job was to take down every Japanese flag that was flying in Tokyo Bay. I had a different enlistment than most of them. I had a victory plus 6. So I had to stay 6 months after the armistice was signed. So I got transferred to another ship, the USS Yosemite. And so I had to stay in Japan until I think the 5th of March. I walked the beat there in Tokyo, and on the streets. First thing is, for the first 2 weeks, we went in every building in Tokyo that the door was closed, and if the door was locked, we just tore the door off and checked for munitions and anything that pertained to war. And you'd be surprised at the number of places we went into that the grandmas were sitting in the corner in the dark filing parts for rifles. The beachmaster told me, he said, "You can have a rifle, but you gotta see the guy that has the rifle shot and killed. You gotta see him fall. And then he says you gotta wait 15 minutes to make sure he wasn't booby-trapped. After 15 minutes I picked the rifle up, and my gosh, must have weighed 50 pounds of mud and rifle and 2 bayonets with it. And so I took it back to the ship and wrapped it in my blanket. 3-4 months later, I still had the rifle. And he said, you can take it home with you. But he says, I says, how am I going to do that? And he says, well, pack it in your sea bag. And I packed the clothes around it just as tight as I could shove them in there. I left the ship in New York. And I thought, you know, we got to go through customs. And I looked at that. Like, how do you suppose I'm going to get that through customs without either somebody stealing it or they make me take it out? But they didn't. And then we took a night train to Chicago. Customs again. Now I know I'll lose it. And then we went up, it's about an hour north of Chicago, where we, up there at the Navy base. And so they had me write down what inventory I had, and I told them, just honest with them, and they didn't touch it. So I got that, and he said, you just leave that here, and I'll send this home to your parents. The sea bag, it weighed about 80 pounds then, or maybe more. And so about 2 weeks later, the postman knocked on my mother's door and says, you know, there's something out here that I'm supposed to deliver to you. He says, what is it? Well, he says, something different than I've delivered yet. And she went out and looked at it, and she said, well, I'll just take and lift that in the garage. She couldn't even lift it. So that night when next time I come home, she says, oh, there's something out in the garage, I don't know what it is for you. And you know, I didn't unwrap that for probably 3 years. None of that stuff. When I came home, my parents had moved from the farm to Malvern, and the town, their house in Malvern burnt Christmas Eve. So it burned out everything that had anything to do with me burnt. And I didn't know it for 6 months. And so when I came home, they had moved to Glenwood already. And my sisters and my brother Jim was going to Glenwood to school. I went back to Malvern. You can't believe, I didn't know anybody. Absolutely did not know anybody. And I knew even less people than nobody in Glenwood. When I got off the train in Council Bluffs, the cabbie says, where do you want to go, sailor? And I said, to Glenwood. Okay, we got in Glenwood. He said, where do you want to go? I said, I don't know. You can't believe what 3.5 years did to me as well as the country. My parents were different. They'd moved to town. I didn't fit with them. So I tried to live with my brother. I didn't fit with him either. I didn't fit with anybody. I was actually a misfit, lost. I hated myself. I really did. I hated myself and you can't believe. I know exactly why these guys commit suicide. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? In my position, it would have been easy. But I wasn't about to commit suicide for nobody. But I never was in a place in my life that was supposedly home, or I didn't know anything. I was just lost. If I hadn't have met that red-headed gal, I'd have went back to the Navy. That's where I belonged. My ears, at that time, would seep blood every night. Every time I laid down on a pillow, that pillow would be bloody. And of course, I didn't tell my wife before we got and I can't begin to tell you how much money they've spent on my ears. And of course, you got to go through the whole thing again. How did this happen? Well, how'd that happen? And I would tell them, I never heard of it. I can't believe it. I said, well, you look at my pillow, you can believe it. And so my wife woke up one time before I did, and there was blood on the pillow. And you can hear her, I can hear her screaming yet. You're gonna hemorrhage. You're gonna bleed to death. Oh no, I said, it's just normal. I said, it kind of comes and goes. And still today, 80 years later, it still does today. Yeah, I was so close to headed back to the Navy. I belonged there. And, but she was a young girl that had graduated from high school, still 17, and she was not a giggler. You know, 17-year-old girls. Yeah. Oh, you talk about setting me off. I absolutely could not take it.
But she wasn't like that.
Nope. And she wasn't a yes person. I mean, everything I would say, yes. She would say yes. No, no, she wasn't that type. She had her opinions just like most people do. Mm-hmm. And we didn't agree on everything. But here was the story. We started going to movies. I didn't see very many movies until I came home, because I wasn't ever on board long enough. But, and then we got through with seeing movies. Why, if there was a stage show in Omaha, we'd go to the stage show. And we just enjoyed that. I didn't know I was enjoying life so much. And the other thing was too, you know, I didn't know that she danced. Well, when I was in New York, that one night we were in New York, why Rudy and I and a couple of the other guys, maybe 6 of us, I don't know, went into the big USO there, and we thought we'd get coffee and donuts. Well, we walked through the door, and all these young ladies was there and grabbed us by the arm and says, it's dance time. I can't dance. She says, when you leave here tonight, you'll dance. So, and I never thought much about it, and so we did learn to dance, all of us. And we had a pretty good time. Well, when I come home, I didn't go to any dances. And my future wife said one night, we'd seen the movies, and she says, it's too bad you can't dance. She said, we'd go to some of these dances here in Omaha. I said, what do you mean can't dance? She said, you never told me. I said, well, there's a lot of things, dear, that I haven't told you. Oh, she said, oh. So, we went to a dance one night, and we danced for, 75 years, I suppose, 70 anyway. And some of the ladies at the reunions would tell her different things, and she says, I didn't know that. And you don't know anything about him, do you? She says, no. And then the other lady said, it's a good thing he didn't tell you, because you wouldn't have believed it anyway. So they did the impossible. My wife and I were in Virginia to a program. When we was going to leave, I looked at the map and I said, let's just go through Atlanta and go down and see Rudy. I'd kept track of quite a lot of them, see, in Atlanta and different places. And so she says, that sounds good. I'd like to see old Rudy myself. And so we went through Atlanta and took a couple of days and wandered around and visited this one and that one. And so when we got close to Gulfport, Mississippi, I called. His number was in the phone book. I got his phone number and I called, and his wife answered. And she says, who is this? I told her. She started crying. Oh, I said, did I offend you or something? She said, I'm sorry if I did. No. She said, over her crying, I finally figured out what the problem was. She says, the last thing that Rudy spoke to me, said before he died, the very last thing he said, be sure and let Hays know. And she said, I didn't have the heart to call and tell you. And so I excused myself and told her I was sorry, and I never kept up with her afterwards. It upset her so much. He wanted to make sure that I knew, because he knew I'd be at the funeral. So we were like blood brothers. I mean, or even more so. I was closer to him than I was my brother. Yep. Or the other 3 or 4 too, the same way. I'm one of these firm believers that somebody paid for my freedom and I paid for somebody else's. Because my grandparents, my great-grandfather was in the Civil War. My dad was in the regular war, one. They call that the big one. And I think some of the relation was that the revolution. So it goes clear back from the family, as far as they can find out. If I was 17, I'd do it all over again. I would.